What's the state of the war?
Well, it's not looking good for Ukraine. This summer offensive, counteroffensive scam, we knew that it's not going to go well. So for Ukraine, the question is, was the defense of Bakhmut worth it? 47th Brigade, which was the flagship of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, got demolished to the point where now it's mostly mobilized personnel. There's this website funded by the BBC called Mediazona, which tracks down Russian social media, every platform, and looks for families talking about their military fatalities in their family, whether it's a son, father, brother, whatever. And they also look at local newspapers that talk about fatalities from their village, from the region, and they think that it's 37,000 since the beginning of the war from Russia proper. 37,000 KIA. We're very far from the 350,000, 400,000 often brought
Now
up
that
in the
that
media.
sounds very different, than the Western media. Are you calling them liars?
Yeah.
What's up, everyone? This is the Geopop Perspective. Today, my guest is Alex from History Legends. How you doing, Alex?
Hey. Thanks for the invite.
So, Alex, you are, I think, probably one of the best YouTube personalities for sure that's reporting and covering the Ukraine war and some of these global conflicts so far. Specifically, I mean, you take a pretty neutral stance, and your opinions and your analysis is very much historically backed. So, can you tell us a little bit about your podcast and how you got into it?
Yes, sure. But I have a question first. Everyone, I'm so happy to be here because I got a fresh cut just for you. So that's a huge step. And the second thing is that it's not live, right? No, huh?
No, we're not live right now. We're
And is
just
this like an exclusive, or it's gonna be on YouTube?
it's going to be on YouTube. I've been posting it in the podcast section of my
Right.
channel, as well as putting it on various other playlists. But yeah, it's not live, just to make sure there's no sound issues. Like I don't have the best mic in the world right now, so I
Yeah.
like to go back, edit the sound, and
Yeah.
make sure
So
it's good quality.
because of your invite, I got a nice fresh cut. And about my podcast, well, it's a YouTube channel. I actually started on Instagram doing little comparison historical posts comparing modern armies and everything. First account got nuked, and this pushed me to go onto YouTube because it was safer, believe it or not, to go on YouTube, and I could actually monetize my knowledge. And I was lucky; it worked. Like people liked my funny jokes, my cringy moments, and and yeah, it's really with the Ukraine war that my channel like took off.
Yeah, you really do have a way of lightening the mood when we're not talking about some of the more serious matters. I won't repeat any of your jokes, but I was telling you about the other day. You have one joke that I think about literally every time.
Which one? I
Uh,
forgot.
it was the one about recruitment, the Ukrainian recruitment fans. Yeah, the
Oh, yeah.
Mia Malkova joke was pretty funny. I'm not gonna lie. I think underappreciated because I started going through the comments and I didn't see enough comments about it.
Oh my god.
Yeah, it was
Nobody
pretty
dared
fun.
to put the words, you know.
Yeah, it was definitely pretty good. All
Thanks.
right, so yeah, I said I was going to get a haircut, and it's just I mean I live in Denver right now, and I'm telling you, like in some of these big cities in the U.S. It's impossible to like get a haircut, like especially like for men anyways. Like you go to the barber shop, and most of them, like most decent barbershops, have you make an appointment, and
Yeah.
we're guys, dude, we don't plan ahead for
I had to
anything.
book an appointment like 4 days ago.
Yeah, and it's better now. Like during the pandemic and after, it was like you had to book like 3 months in advance to get an appointment. But yeah, I couldn't get a haircut in time, and I'm not going into sports clips. So here I am, a bearded mess. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and dive in and just go ahead and get your perspective on the current state of things in Ukraine, and then we're going to, expand out into some more
Yeah,
specific
sure.
questions on your analysis. So, what's the state of the war?
Well, it's not looking good for Ukraine. Uh, the big problem is that this summer offensive, counteroffensive scam. We knew that it's not going to go well. Um, we had some podcasts together that we discussed what could happen in the next few months after Bakhmut, and most of it's actually slowly taking place. So now the problem of the Ukrainians is that they lost a lot of weapons, military equipment, lots of NATO trained troops in the fields of Zaporozhye. And now they don't really know what to do. I think that's the big problem of the Ukrainian command right now. They don't have a plan B because their only solution is to get back the borders of 1991. And this means at this moment, constantly going on the offensive. Now that they lost in southern Ukraine, um, what can they do now? Stay on the defensive, but that would mean they lost the war. And that would also mean that they would only fight to lose less of their territory.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely it really is something because it seems to me like the plan was really just to throw some troops, money, and equipment at gaining enough ground for a reinvestment to occur from the West. Does that sound basically what the plan was? Like if it, maybe
Mhm.
perhaps not even reaching the Sea of Azov, but creating a big enough wedge in Russian lines, maybe the Americans and the Europeans will give us a second round of funding and equipment. It feels like that's what Ukraine was hoping for.
Yeah, it's very possible, and yeah. So we saw the problem of the confirmed losses. We don't know how many losses they had that is not recorded. When you have an artillery strike at the rear and nothing is recorded, probably some equipment got destroyed, but you don't have an actual proof. You have a lot of hangars garage that were destroyed that could have had some Leopard 2s or Bradleys inside. So it's very hard to know the actual amount of casualties. But for example, the 47th Brigade, which was the flagship of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, got demolished to the point where now it's mostly mobilized personnel. It's not the well-trained guys that started the entire thing.
Right.
And
Yeah.
And I think there was also some sort of waking call because this 47th Brigade, the West blamed a lot of Ukraine's problems on Soviet mentality, Soviet hierarchy, Soviet stiffness. But most of Ukrainian military officers stem from the Soviet mentality. Now, they wanted guys that did not go through this. So they took this brigade, and all the commanders were under 30, and they did not go through this Soviet military academy. Now, they were trained by the West, fully equipped by the West. They had M16s, Bradleys, Leopard 2s, full NATO. They go into battle and they get wrecked, and they get wrecked over and over again. The Bradleys, the piles of Bradleys that were lost, massive, heavy casualties they suffered, and to the point where now the brigade is only a shadow of its former self. Goes to show that maybe NATO equipment is not the solution. NATO ideology in combat is perhaps also not the answer.
Is there any other potential possibilities for why it could have failed so dramatically? Like maybe just uh, maybe the equipment that was provided just wasn't sufficient, or air support, things like that.
There are many reasons. It's always easy to explain the defeat because there's so many reasons that could explain it. I think it's a pile of events. First of all, that they announced
Hmm.
where they would attack like a month before. I think, long story short, I think they attacked too late. I think the Ukrainian counteroffensive in Zaporozhye to reach Crimea should have been done in winter, right after their success in Kharkiv. This was the moment where the Russian army was at the weakest. They did not have,
Demoralized too.
it was demoralized, not enough men on the ground. They had lost so many battles back to back, and they didn't have the mobilized personnel yet. And there were no defenses in Zaporozhye or nothing substantial. So, had the Ukrainians attacked at this moment with whatever they had available, I think they would have won. However, something happened that diverted their attention. It's the Battle of Bakhmut. And they actually fell in the trap. Bakhmut was a
Mm-hmm.
trap, and the Ukrainians sent all their troops there instead of sending them towards Crimea. So that was the first big mistake. And I mean, after that, when the enemy is building strong defenses, 5 layers of defenses, minefields, whatever you name it, it just makes it much more difficult. And especially after the Russians mobilized hundreds of thousands of men, and you lost the surprise effect. I mean, then it's tactical stuff, but from a macro perspective, that's the reason.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned Bakhmut and deciding to, be so, what's the word, like stalwart in their defense, like just not willing to give an inch there, spending lives. It's almost like, of course, you have military doctrine, which you can divide basically into two categories: offensive and defensive, right? But they can't, which obviously are very different, but they have to be compatible with one another. Like if Ukraine is looking for some kind of mobile deep battle offense, like you can't have like um, a defense that doesn't give up ground. You have to be
Mm-hmm.
willing to give ground in order to take more ground. Like sacrifice a pawn to take out a knight. Basically, like that seems pretty logical to me and most people, and it seems like the big mistake that was made with Bakhmut is, of course, we don't know how many Ukrainians were killed in Bakhmut, and all you're seeing in the Western media is the Russian losses, which most people are saying around 30,000, and they're claiming that number was
And,
detrimental to the
and
Russian
even
army.
that,
While
I don't think
at
it's
the
that
same,
heavy.
yeah, well, I don't either. That's just the base media claim, and then on top of that, they also say, well, these were penal battalions, and it's like, well,
Yeah.
so is how detrimental is that to the Russian army? Like, obviously, a life is a life, but it just doesn't make a lot of sense. But this is actually a question that I had for later on, but I'll go ahead and move it up since we're already talking about casualties. And really, even this is going to segue into another bigger question, something that I'm not sure if you've seen yet that's taking place on the front lines. But do you think that, let's say that Russia did lose 30,000 troops taking Bakhmut, like let's pretend that that's accurate information. Um, in the context of, say, World War I or World War II, is that heavy losses for the capture of a city of 80,000 people?
The thing is, this is the talking points of the Western media to say that's a city of X number of inhabitants. There's a lot of flaws because if you turn this argument around, you can say how many Ukrainian losses were tallied for a village of 200 inhabitants in
Yeah,
southern Ukraine.
Robotny or something. Yeah.
Exactly. So, okay, but that's not the
So
point.
okay, well let's change it to for a industrialized urban area in a battle that took 8
The
months.
the question was, what was the military political objective of both sides at this moment? And only then can we look at the amount of casualties. For the Russians, or rather for Prigozhin, the game was to pin down the Ukrainian army in Bakhmut, very far away from Crimea. In my opinion, that was the plan. And why Bakhmut? Because the Ukrainians fixed a political objective, which was, we will not lose another city. Remember, this happened after Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, and everything. They said, we will not lose another city. Fine. So the Russians said, you won't lose another city? All right, we'll attack Bakhmut. This forced the Ukrainian political leadership to defend the city. because otherwise they would lose trust of the Ukrainian population. So that was the political situation. Now, in that regard, for the Russians, now it was a matter of pinning down the Ukrainians in Bakhmut as long as possible, while they build their forces for their own offensive later on, and to prepare the defenses in southern Ukraine for the summer. So for Ukraine, the question is, was the defense of Bakhmut worth it?
Mm-hmm.
Because now, I mean, the front did not collapse west of Bakhmut, and was it necessary to hold this city at all costs?
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when you ended up losing it in the end, anyways. Um, all the talk of well, it seems like the Ukrainians tried to flip the script and like, well, we lost it, but we inflicted a heavy price on the enemy, and it's like,
Mhm.
if the price is lives, um, the enemy has a bigger bank account, so like it's not really, even if the Russians lost 10, 20, 30% more men than the Ukraine did defending it, like it's not an even exchange. Russia has three
Yeah.
times the population and many times more than that in terms of military equipment and storage, which, a lot of it's mothballed and, face value worthless, but they can put that back into the factory and refurbish it and,
Hmm.
a lot quicker than building a brand new BMP, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think really what I was getting at was, it seems to me, and based on your knowledge of history, I think both of us like reading a lot about history and famous battles and stuff. It seems to me like, considering the maximum losses that the West is claiming on the Russian army, that and maybe I'm not just referring to Bakhmut, but all these battles like Popasna, Severodonetsk, Lysychansk,
Yeah.
Mariupol, all of them, um, the cost seems far lower, um, you know, building for building, than it does for similar battles that happened in World War II that happened much, much faster. Like how many losses did the German army take capturing Kiev from the Russians? Like tens of
But
thousands, while inflicting, hundreds of thousands of losses on the Russian side. But it's like, um,
there's
I don't know.
I think the it's very interesting. It's a good question, but I think the answer is also very simple. So you said the keyword at one point, speed. So when you want to capture a position quickly, that means you're ready to trade man for time. So that's the first thing, right? Now, then the second factor is that there were way more many men involved in these battles. So yeah, the Germans lost many casualties because the Russians had hundreds of thousands of men with a rifle that could shoot. So yeah, even if today the firepower of a squad is much higher than it was 100 years ago, eventually, when you have a lot of men, you're gonna have a lot of casualties too. And the last point is that soldiers now have better protection in terms of flak jackets, helmets, and everything. So the number of casualties will be much lower than during World War II, when you think about it, the soldiers had zero protection.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, just these, the metal helmets that, according to the war movies I've seen, didn't work very well.
Well,
Um,
it worked, but they didn't have any skin protection, or not very much. So
mhm.
nowadays we have very light protection, and a lot of soldiers actually had their lives saved because of those.
It's actually interesting, and this is a little bit off topic, but you're a history guy, so I think you'll like this. Why do you think there was never a decision made? Of course, you have like, if you think about like the kit that a typical soldiers had throughout history, like you go back pre-Roman times, and pretty basic, and then the Romans really first started pioneering chainmail and plate. I mean, early plate armor is just like sheets of metal and stuff like that, and then technologies change, and armor becomes less popular again, and then all of a sudden during the medieval times, like you end up with knights that are just wearing like literally head to toe, like just heavy steel plate. I mean, you still see, like, you see similar stuff in these guys that do these Have you ever seen like the reenactments they do in the UK? Well, two guys will be wearing like
Yeah.
100 pounds of iron, and they'll hit each other with axes and crap. It's kind of funny, but like that's, I mean, pretty close to what it was like for a little while. And then when gunpowder came out, and you know, armies switched on mass to rifles, it seemed like there was a cost benefit of
Mhm.
just getting rid of armor altogether because it didn't help all that much. But why? It seems like at least some armor, like in maybe in the form of chainmail or like thin like sheet plate, you know, isn't going to stop a bullet, but it's going to, you know, make a pretty big effect in terms of like shrapnel wounds. Like, do you have any um,
Well,
insight on why like a decision was never made during like say World War I or World War II to
it's
experiment
actually
with
very
armor?
interesting. Maybe I'm gonna do a video about it.
Yeah.
But essentially, it's the same reason why people abandoned bows and arrows. Why did they abandon it? Because training a proper archer takes years, right? Whereas to train somebody to fire an arquebus or a musket, three weeks to be proficient, and like, you just have to really pull the trigger or aim and shoot. And that was the big problem. A lot of people thought that was the weapon of cowards, firearms, because any peasant could now become extremely lethal, even to a knight.
I always think of that scene from The Last Samurai where, you know, where
Yeah.
he's like, "Tell this man to shoot me or I'll kill him." You know what I'm talking about? Where he's
But I actually made an historical review of the movie, and the samurais actually had machine guns, artillery, and
oh
modern
really?
weapons. Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. And if you have free time, you can watch the video. And
Oh, I definitely will.
yeah, I because I did a lot of research about the Japanese, and they also kind of ditched the armor by that time. So they didn't have actual armor; they used firearms. So there's a reason why everybody dropped the armor. The reason is simple: armor was made to protect from slashing weapons, from lances, from spears, from swords. When you try to
Hmm.
hit axes. So this is what an armor can help, right? Then when firearms came, well, it pierced through. Even if it protected a little bit, it pierced through, especially if you have like a volley, just fires through. So people adapted. They're like, okay, well, it's kind of pointless at this level. Only horse cavalry, like cuirassiers, would keep their armor because it would slash. But
Mm.
troops, it would be less and less with time. And also, well, this kind of contradicts my previous argument, but overall, fire was not that lethal, historically speaking. So when you were very close, yeah, it could pierce through armor. But generally speaking, fire, like people firing in lines and everything, after the first volley, there would be smoke everywhere. And every additional volley would be worse than the previous one because you can't see anything.
Hmm.
So they had to be really close, and casualties were not that
Yeah.
heavy.
You're
And
saying it had low effect rather than it's not. To,
yeah, so
to
the
clarify to the audience, he's not saying that if you get struck by a bullet, it wasn't always lethal. Is almost always lethal, even when you got hit in the arm, like in the Civil War, like people would die from the wounds. But you
Mhm.
know, out of 100 muskets
Yeah,
firing, you
exactly.
saying like 9 or 10 might hit, right?
My apologies. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah. All right, just
And
making sure.
no, no, it's a good disclaimer, and that's the reason. Like very few, there would be very few hits. So that's the main thing. Now, the real danger was shrapnel, like you said. And during the U.S. Civil War, for example, they started building trenches. So very quickly, during these lethal battles, people started fighting from the cover of villages and trenches. So people would not actually, how can I say it? They would always fight. Like, for example, during the US Civil War, when you actually see how they would fight, they would take cover from trees, in barns. Soldiers would take cover, like in places. They would rarely go into the field like we see in the movies. And when they did so, they would take massive casualties. During the Franco-Prussian War, the fighting would take place sometimes at 1 kilometer distance, 1,000 meters. So they would be very far away, and it's really with the artillery that you had to dig in. You had no other choice. And I think there was technological problems. The main reason is that during World War One they tried these armor. It's not as if people didn't try, but it was always metal plates that were very expensive and very heavy. And in a war, they said you have to be fast because if you're a target, you're gonna get fire. Imagine you have a metal plate and you get shot at by a machine gun. It's not gonna do much. So they said, okay, yes, you're less protected, but you're gonna be faster by being lightweight. So you can crawl, you can jump, you can go from one foxhole to another. They said, okay, this is better. Nowadays with technology, we have lightweight. I don't know the how you call it, but you have lightweight protection that you can wear without being metal plates that are super heavy. And actually, Russian soldiers mentioned it when they went before going to the front. They buy their own military equipment, and the metal plates. Not many people want them because they say it will make you slower, and this means being a target.
But yeah, there's such thing now as Kevlar. Actually, it's fibers, you know, that
Yeah. And
can.
I talked to a military medic, and he said that in Ukraine a lot of the wounds are actually in the arms and in the legs. Why? Because I mean, why would a doctor say this? Because if you had a bullet wound in your chest or stomach, you would probably die, or it's protected by your flak jacket. So either the
Right.
bullet is stopped, or if it's not stopped, you're dead.
Yeah, well, that's actually the main purpose in those is you know, you have your helmet, protect your noggin, then you protect your vitals. Everything
Exactly.
else can be
And
repaired,
that's
you
why
know, generally
arms,
speaking.
legs, it's much easier. It's not life threatening.
Right.
So yeah.
Interesting. It also seems like there's a lot higher price on or you know, human life, maybe more value on human life, like if you're thinking like in World War I, World War II, these wars happened after massive population booms. And I mean, there's actually
Mhm.
some pretty good historical analysis that suggests it's why the wars happened is because the,
Yeah.
you know, population was growing so fast that resources were becoming, you know, extremely strained, and that's why
Mhm.
some of these countries started fighting each other is over those resources. So, but now, you know, we're talking about Ukraine. I mean, if you were to compare it, I guess like Russia probably has half the population that the Soviet Union had, and Ukraine has about half the population that Germany had during World War I, so or World War II. So, you know,
Mm-hmm.
a lot more value on life. So this kind of brings me into another
And low
question.
birth rates. Low birth rate.
Oh yeah, that's big.
So
There's
Russia, Ukraine both have low birth rates, so they also want to preserve their nation in some way. They know
mhm,
that yeah, they could win the war. Ukraine technically could mobilize everyone, but what's the point if there's nobody left?
right. Well, speaking of mobilizing everyone, there have recently, and you know, I'm obviously not gonna show the video, but there have been some videos come out from the front line of Russian soldiers taking over positions from Ukrainian army, and amongst the dead seem to be several female soldiers.
Mm.
I'm wondering if you've seen that, what you think of it. Is it a sign that like perhaps Ukrainian casualties are a lot higher? I know they mentioned in the video that it's, you know, one of two possibilities. So, you know, the first is they're ideological, like they're female volunteers, which, you know, happens for sure, especially in a country that's under attack. Or in the case that they are conscripts, you know, that means that Ukraine has been conscripting females into the military now.
Yeah, but first of all, it's in my perspective, this event is anecdotal. So I don't know how widespread this event is along the front. It's not. That's the problem of informational warfare. Is that one video, and we draw massive conclusions out of this one video, right? There's a lot of manpower left in Ukraine, so I don't think there's a need at the moment to draft a woman. I mean, there's millions of men left in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are probably volunteers, and they were caught at the wrong moment. Perhaps they were medics. That's more often than not, females are medics, and during the battle they they got caught into a firefight. It's very possible.
That's a great point, and they would be wearing, uniform,
Yeah.
plate, all that stuff. So, yeah, I think yeah, I mean, it's a great point that it's just one video definitely doesn't prove anything. Um, but there was a rumor spreading around a couple weeks ago that the government had actually said something about
Hmm.
starting to conscript women, the Ukrainian government, and I don't know if it's actually true or not, but it's probably part of the reason why this information
Well,
is catching on really fast.
once again, conscripting women depends for what jobs. For example, they could say, "Yeah, well, you're going to be a cook,"
Yeah,
whereas this guy being a cook can go to the front. A lot of manpower is wasted with the rear jobs. Mailman, I don't know, truck driver,
yeah, runners, truck drivers, yeah,
medics, nurses. Maybe they need nurses, more people at the rear for any sort of job. So maybe they're just going to replace them and bring the men to the front and have less of these guys hiding.
So you don't think Ukraine has reached any kind of critical mass in terms of
No,
casualties
no.
as of?
They did take casualties, but once again, when you look at the population of Ukraine, okay, let's do some math. Ukraine had allegedly before the war, what, 40 million people. No, it's probably not that true. It was probably more like 35 million. And a lot of people left the country, but then they came back, right? Okay.
Hmm.
35 million, half women, half men. It's like what, 15, 17 million of each. And if you take into account that there's a lot of children and older men, well, you still have you have 8, 9 million combat ready men. Okay, some people left. Even if 1 to 2 million Ukrainians left in one way or another, you still have 6, 7 million Ukrainians that are
Right.
there. So yeah, there's casualties, but a lot of the wounds, like we said, can be treated, so the guys can return to the front after some time.
It's actually a really fascinating website. I don't know if you know anything about it, but it's like it's called the
Let me check.
Global Firepower
Oh yeah, yeah, for
Index. If you
sure.
Google that, yeah, Global Firepower. This is pretty cool, actually. I'll just go ahead and plop this up on the
It's
screen.
not the most accurate, but it gives the easy answers.
Yeah,
But
it's a rough calculation, but like it kind of goes through its methodology, and you can go up here and you can compare two countries together. So like if we were to go right here and say, Ukraine
you see, they
and
have
Russia.
15.5 million manpower. I guess that's only males, but 15 million, 15 and a half million Ukraine.
Yeah,
So even
where's
if a
our?
lot of people left, and there's a reason. Like if you go fit for service, the third one,
There you go. Yeah.
but it's the same ratio. That's the thing. It's the same ratio. It stays the same. But
Is this probably includes females as
no,
well,
I
right?
don't think so,
Oh,
because
really?
I think it's only men. Because 15
Interesting.
million, I'm pretty sure there would be double that amount if you had
Yeah.
females.
Well, of course, you got to leave out the children and the
Yeah,
elderly. So,
yeah.
but
But
yeah,
that
over
means there's
half
a
the
lot of
population
people.
for sure.
There's a lot of people left, way more than we think. And even if, in the worst case scenario, Ukraine has 500,000 KIA and severely injured, okay, it's a lot. But
Hmm.
um,
So you think that is probably the worst case scenario?
yeah, I mean, that's the problem with counting casualties, is that for the Russians we kind of know, because there's this website by funded by the BBC called Media Zona, which tracks down Russian social media, every platform, and looks for families talking about their uh, military fatalities in their family, whether it's a son, father, brother, whatever. And they also look at local newspapers that talk about fatalities from their village, from the region, and they think that it's 37,000 since the beginning of the war from Russia proper.
Hmm.
37,000 KIA. We're very far from the 350,000, 400,000 often brought
Now
up in the
that
media.
sounds very different, yeah, than the Western media. Are you calling them liars?
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I've never ever seen a lie told on CNN. So
And that's a problem. It's almost 10 times different. So that
yeah,
can give you an idea of how they count stuff.
it's interesting. Interesting. All right. Well, not to. I mean, we could talk about this forever. So I'm going to try to move on because I know you're pretty limited on time. So real quick, want to talk about Avdiivka. And basically your analysis of what's going on there is Russia losing a lot of men, running into a brick wall? Are is Ukraine in real trouble? Has Russia taken any lessons from the Ukrainian offensive of the summer? What do you think?
Well, I think the Russians did take casualties at the beginning, but once again, it's more armored vehicles. I don't know how many of these can be retrieved, and I don't know how many personnel losses. The problem is, I don't know if the mic exploded, but the problem is we often count 5 casualties per vehicle. Now, this is false. It doesn't work like that. So the Russians lost a certain number of troops in the initial days. They thought they could break through. It didn't work. But now we've seen they've been pushing closer and closer. And this time, compared to the Ukrainian summer offensive, the objective is much more restrained and realistic. They only have 6 kilometers to cover before the two tips touch, right? And then it's an encirclement before the northern and the southern pincers link up. It's a very tactical battle. It's nothing fancy, and the city was already 3 quarters encircled before the Russians started. So the hardest part is already done. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, it seemed like, I mean, kind of similar to Bakhmut. The only difference with Bakhmut, which got down to what, like 2 kilometers or something, 2 or 3 kilometers is really close. But there was, a number of hills in the area that separated, created a barrier for the Ukrainians to defend, and it doesn't seem like that's the case here. Um, do you think it's going to play out the same way? Are we going to see a long, protracted battle with Ukraine just eventually withdrawing out, or is there actually
Well,
a chance of encirclement?
when the Russians started the Battle of Bakhmut, their city was 1 quarter encircled. The Russians had to go on the flanks to level the front line, and it's only when they captured Soledar that they could start this flanking maneuver, but it took a lot of time because it was only Wagner, which barely had any armored vehicles. It was an infantry battle, and they had to really do this entire maneuver. Now, the Russian armed forces have way more troops available, and like I said, the objective is almost completed. Avdiivka was a prime target.
Interesting, very interesting. All right, one more question on Ukraine, just a quick question, and then we're going to close out with your opinion on what's going on in Israel, Gaza. Close out with something that's not controversial
Yeah,
at
not
all.
controversial,
Yeah.
just like
So,
chill, relaxed.
I'm getting a lot of comments, and of course, I'm just doing just blanket reporting on this stuff. I'm just telling people what's going on. I make assessments and give my opinions where I think they're relevant. But there's nothing I can say definitively about any of this stuff. But this is one thing I don't understand, is what's going on the Dnieper River, because Ukraine has crossed the river
Mhm.
and they have got a foothold on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River on the Russian Kherson side. So my analysis up to this point has been, this is probably pretty inconsequential. The likelihood of Ukraine being able to supply a large force on the opposite side of the river without a bridge just seems like it's going to end the same way the Russians did when,
Mhm.
back last fall. So is there, a different assessment of that is there something I'm missing here?
No, I think your assessment is correct, and I just don't understand why they did not launch this operation at the same time as the summer offensive. I just don't think Ukraine has a proper idea of what they want to do. and right now their attacks are all piecemeal. Why did they launch this operation across the Dnieper so late? They could have launched it at the same time as they launched the attack. And why did they have an attack in Bakhmut with the elite of the Ukrainian army? Why would they waste their time in Bakhmut when the real goal is Crimea? So then they have a lot of troops that are north, elite brigades. Then they have an attack in the southern sector, like spread in 3 parts of the front. And then they don't attack across the Dnieper. It just doesn't make sense. I don't think they have any idea of what they're doing. And it seems more like this is some plan B operation just to show the world that Ukraine is still making gains.
Mm.
But
So it's a media victory, is what you're saying.
It's a media victory because the operation across the Dnieper doesn't make sense if you don't have an attack across the fields of Zaporozhye. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Could it be that it was planned to take place at the same time, and then the dam, whatever happened to the dam, everyone's pretty settled in with who they think blew it up. To this point, I don't think there's any evidence to say either side did it, but I think some of the better assessments that claim it was the Russians, what they are saying is the Russians blew it up because they had intelligence of a Ukrainian river crossing, and
why would they blow it up? They could just open the thing.
Open the floodgates. Yeah, that well, yeah.
No, but really,
that's the best hole in that argument. I think.
Exactly. I mean, I want to understand why they. Mm-hmm. Why would you blow up the door if you can just open it?
Yeah. But the argument, and gosh, this is not something I wanted to get stuck on, but the argument that the Ukrainians did it doesn't really make a lot of sense either.
Well, there were the Russian defenses, the fortifications, and they all got swallowed up.
That is true, because
all the minefields that were there, all the fortifications that the Russian built before, which were
along the river.
Exactly, all the firing positions, they all got swallowed up by the water.
See, well, okay, that makes slightly more sense than, what I was hearing was by draining the lake, the Ukrainians can launch an operation across the river to get to the nuclear power plant. But nothing like that, to my knowledge, has even been attempted.
The thing is, it turned out that it became some sort of like a massive marshland. And when you think about it, this lake is open ground. There's no cover. Absolutely no cover. So, So it's going to be 10, 15 miles, I don't know, of you running across the field.
It's going to be even worse in the wintertime.
I think it's like if you're going to be such a target. I don't see any armored formation. There's no tree line, no village, nothing that could make you hide or avoid. You can't even dig that area. It's like sand. Mm-hmm. So you're going to dig its water. So yeah, in theory, it could have been used. I even mentioned it or something like this, but now that we have the reality, it's a bit more complicated.
All right, thanks for all of the valuable information.
I hope what I say makes sense, right? I hope you're not.
It does. No, it does. It does. I like hearing other analysis outside of my own. I mean, the reason why I'm starting to do this podcast now. Yeah. I want to hear other people talk. This channel's full of me talking. Last question before we wrap it up. So we've done enough reporting. Both of us have done reporting on what's going on in Israel and Gaza, and really just a summary. What I'm looking for is how long do you think it will take? Or how is the Israeli military doing with this Gaza operation so far? Is it are they proficient?
First of all, did you? Maybe we talked about it, but do you also face some kind of censorship or problems with your Israel Hamas videos? I had a lot of problems, but
it's weird because it's a huge topic, and the people that are looking at Ukraine stuff are often the same people looking at the
Mhm.
Israel Gaza stuff. And if you look at certain people's channels, like they do just as good in terms of views, analytics on their, Israel videos as they do their Ukraine videos. And I mean, a lot of people in the audience don't care, but we have this one statistic that pretty much guarantees what your views are going to be. It's called click-through rate.
Mhm.
It's the number of times you actually click on something that you see that's been put in front of you. And if
Mhm.
the higher that rate is, means the more interesting your thumbnail or the first 30 seconds of your video is, and more people are going to click on it and watch it. So if you have a higher CTR, then YouTube shows your video to more people.
Not
Well,
necessarily, but
I mean, there are some nuances there and differences, but I've had several videos with
yeah,
very high click-through rates that just weren't, that YouTube just didn't show to anybody.
yeah.
So I mean, I can't say for sure, but I mean, I haven't really taken I haven't taken a side or an opinion on that conflict at all. So
Yeah, I think the big problem of reporting on this conflict is that people already have an opinion about it. So nobody really knew about Ukraine, Russia before the war erupted. Like most
mhm.
people thought it was the same country. Now, so people had to build their opinion, right? Now, for Israel Palestine, it's such a conflict that's been dragging on for decades. People already are positioned. People are very emotional about it because it ticks off this every talking points that is controversial. I'm not gonna list them because I don't want this video to have problems, but it's highly sensitive topics at every level. Now, so that's the first point. Like it's very hard
Yeah.
to be seen as neutral because I mean people will, if you don't say this, people will, will assume you're in this position. Like anyway,
Yeah.
we all have these comments. Now I
With the
think
with the Russia Ukraine thing, it's like your Slava Ukraine people and your Slava Russia people are all just trolls, really. I mean,
yeah,
outside of the few Ukrainians and Russians in the Western world that can speak English and engage in this stuff, like
yeah,
everyone else didn't even know where Ukraine was on a map before this started. But I mean, you want to see some ferocious commentary, like look in any video about Israel Palestine. It's
yeah.
crazy, really crazy.
And now I think the Israeli army is doing better than expected. Um,
Hmm.
but at the same time, right now they're only fighting in northern part of the Gaza Strip. So it depends how many casualties they're really ready to take, and they still have to capture the entire part of Gaza. And then I don't know, many troops could be in tunnels and pop up in neighborhoods that were thought to be secured.
Right.
And then the question is, what are they going to do with the rest of the Gaza Strip? Are they just going to stop there and say, stop the campaign at Gaza and call it a day, say they won, and repeat everything in 5 to 10 years? Or are they going to go to the end? And because there's other cities, there's Gaza City in the north, there's Khan Yunis in the center, and there's Rafah in the south.
Hmm.
And the more people, all the civilians are now in the south, so it's going to be an extremely complicated position to attack with all the civilians. So,
Yeah. And do you think they're likely to try to push into the South as well?
all that's the big question. My analysis when was that yeah, they would want to attack everything, and it's logical. What the Israelis are doing now, it's very logical, very meticulous combat. Now the big question is, now, how can I say this? The problem of the Israelis is that they think they can solve all of their problems through military means. And although that worked for some time in their history, now it's backfiring a lot.
Hmm.
So in Gaza, now, even if we can almost be certain of who will win the military battle, the real question will be what will they do from a political perspective? That and we can talk about it quickly. Like, what are the options? So, number one, um, every Palestinian can come back to Gaza like they wanted, and it's just under Israeli supervision. Okay, that's exactly what was the situation like in the year 2000, 20 years ago. but this time you destroyed all their homes. A lot of people are not there anymore, and you have a new generation of kids that are going to be radicalized. And in 10, 15 years, you have your new wave of fighters. They can kick them all out towards Egypt, and that's going to trigger another problem. So it's the question of what they plan on doing that's really going to cement their victory or turn their military victory into a political defeat. I don't know what's your analysis. I'm curious to hear.
Yeah. Well, man, I am. I mean, I have some like different opinions on it, but like, I'm not even gonna go there. To be honest,
Well,
I haven't thought about it enough to say it in such a way where I can articulate it properly and with pissing off the least amount of people. But I mean, I will say that I mean the whole thing is an absolute tragedy, and I mean with it,
for sure, for
like
sure.
there's
But we have
what's
to
that?
be clinical for sure. But we have to
Oh
be
yeah,
clinical about it. We can't be taken by emotion when analyzing the situation. This is why people look up to us too on the reporting, because if we start getting emotional, we're gonna get biased and we might get information wrong. So
yeah.
so our job is to be cold about it. And
Yeah, I mean, when we're doing our report, I mean, and that's one of the biggest things I think that makes us neutral is because like when you get on some of these uh, different sites that obviously it's just propaganda. It's like the savage invader did this today, or it's
yeah,
like
yeah,
the Nazi scum did this today, and it's like Jesus Christ, can we just say like the side A and side B, and like at least not you're not going to open up a history book and read that, like
yeah,
it's going to be as objective as it can be, like even if it is written by one party. But yeah, I mean,
yeah.
just like the thing with Israel is like, I mean, both sides have some certainly have logical arguments to them.
Mhm,
But the fascinating thing I think is the Jews in Israel really started before the state of Israel was incepted um, as pacifists. Like they didn't want to fight, and like during the the 30s and 40s, they're very much radicalized.
mhm,
And since they've taken on more aggressive actions militarily, it's always been beneficial to them. And
mhm,
we're talking about a short history here from.
mhm.
I mean, what 80 years that the country, 70, almost not even 80 years, right? It's 1947,
Well, let's say 100 years
86
since the
years.
first waves of since the Palestinian mandate under British occupation. Like we can say 100 years.
There's still Jews alive in Israel that were born in the British Mandate. Not many, but a few, like
Okay. Yeah.
as centennials or whatever you would call. So like, it's really hasn't been that long, and it takes a long time for um, culture and military doctrine, political decisions, and to really develop into something mature, right? Like Israel is an immature country in terms of like how long its political system's been around. Like France, for example, is what one of the oldest countries and nations in the whole world. Goes back well over 1,000 years, right? I mean,
Yeah, but I mean the it's all the political system. If you look at the last this version of the French Constitution is only since the 60s. So
right. I mean, we're going on like the Fourth
uh,
Republic or something like that, right? But like still though, like French politicians and French people, like when they make decisions, like they have more history to reference before they make these bad decisions. It's like,
well,
Germany pisses us off. Oh, let's attack Germany. The
but
average French person is going to think twice about that now. Like
yeah, but I think that people tend to forget history too. So I think that stuff in the past is in the past. And
mhm.
whereas the situation now with Israel, yeah, there's a historical aspect, but it's also like a very now in the moment. Like,
Yeah.
what are they going to do about the situation now? So, yeah, there is some historical background. I would say, for example, about Palestinian refugees going to Jordan, to Lebanon. There's been problems with that. I don't know if you're aware of, but a lot of
Mhm.
Arab countries in the region, they're thinking twice. about all this.
Oh yeah,
About
well, I mean, half the population of Jordan wasn't originally there. I mean, Jordan's population was doubled after 1947, and it's the
yeah.
middle of the
Well,
freaking
Jordan
desert. Like
was
they
a
don't have
country
room.
in and Jordan was a country, let's say, invented by the British. So
Hmm.
Jordanians and Palestinians are almost the same people. I mean, there's
I
only
mean,
a
yeah, they
big
are.
border.
Amman was part of the region.
And but the question is, after a moment, it was from a why. The thing is, once the Palestinians went into Jordan, they continued the fight against Israel from there. When they went to Lebanon, they continued the fight against Israel from there. So if all the Palestinians from Gaza would have to go in refugee camps in Egypt, well, it's very likely that they're going to continue the fight against Israel from there.
Hmm. Yeah, I think I agree with that, and I think maybe like the broader point I was getting at was like Israel is going to have to suffer some negative consequences from aggressive actions at some point in its future before it begins to like think twice about making these aggressive actions. So,
Yeah, and it's a conflict that it's so new. You know, it's like at the beginning of Russia Ukraine, there's a lot of wild claims that we're not even sure of what sources to trust or not. As the war continues, we'll have a better understanding.
mhm.
Now, the terrain is much smaller, the ground, so it goes faster. Events go faster there. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. Now, to be honest, on my end, I don't know how often I'll keep reporting on this because it hasn't been very. It's been difficult on my end, so
Yeah.
I'll
It's
have
tough to
to.
look at. I mean, it is complex. And I mean, just to clarify for the audience, because I have, when I speak of aggressive Israeli actions, I'm talking about like, carpet bombing and, like a lot of these different things, a lot of the suppression of the West Bank, things like that. That's not to say that this is entirely Israel's fault, because the first shot was not fired by Israel in October. At least when we're speaking of the current conflict, Hamas definitely invaded Israel. So I know if you don't state all the facts here, then people get so butthurt about it. But
Yeah, and
yeah,
people
I mean,
come up with history. They say no, but four
there's
months
guilt everywhere.
earlier, and then this happened before, and it's always like hit for hit. Yeah, the question is, how far is Israel ready to go? I think that's the big question
Hmm.
because they've always been stopped by the international community, but I don't know if they'll stop this time.
All right, man, we're going on about an hour. I don't think we have time to talk about Ridley Scott's Napoleon,
Well, you know what?
unfortunately.
I can come back
Yeah,
as your guest. I can
we.
come back, but I don't want to spoil too much. This is the my duty for next week.
Oh, you okay? You're already going. So I'm guessing you did already see the new trailers coming out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I cried for like an hour when I saw what they did to
You know,
Austerlitz. I was just.
you know, how can I say this? The movie is 2 hours and a half. I think there's a long version, but what can you say in 2 hours and a half about Napoleon's entire career? You're gonna have to skip through so many parts.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm preparing a surprise, so I can't spoil.
Okay. All
But
right. All right.
well, we can
You
definitely
could
talk
tell
about.
me offline.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
It gives the audience something to look forward to. Yeah, if you want good Napoleon stuff, Epic History TV, that's on YouTube.
Yeah.
That's the place to go. That is great. All right, Alex, where can people find you? You got any social media outside of YouTube?
History Legends on YouTube. History Legends underscore on Twitter. History Legends 2 on Instagram in remembrance of History Legends that got nuked. So yeah, those are the places you can find me.
And what's a Twitter at? I've never heard of. Oh, you mean X? You mean X? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I get it now. All right. All right, Alex. Thanks for coming on, man.
All right. Thank you.